The smoke of Athens rose like serpents against the red sky, curling through the air as if the city's soul itself was burning. The marble that once gleamed white under the Attic sun had turned to ash and ruin. Streets where philosophers once argued about virtue and beauty now echoed only with the sound of boots and broken cries. From the heights of the Acropolis, the Persian banners unfurled, black and gold, heavy with the emblem of the rising sun. The invincible army of Xerxes had arrived. To some, this was divine justice. To others, desecration. But to the women trapped below, it was the end of the world. Xerxes watched it all from a marble terrace overlooking the ruined city. He was dressed not as a warrior, but as a god, a long robe of beaten gold, a diadem of lapis and turquoise, his hands adorned with rings that caught the firelight of the burning temples. Around him, his immortals stood silent, spears in hand, their discipline cold as the stone beneath their feet. Below, the Persians moved like an unending tide through the ruins. They tore open doors, broke statues, and pulled the surviving Greeks into the streets. It was not enough to conquer their armies. Xerxes wanted to break their spirit. His voice, calm and measured, carried across the courtyard. "They defied Persia," he said softly. "Let their daughters bear our mark." No scribe dared write the words, but every soldier understood. In the rubble of a small courtyard, Thea of Athens pressed herself against the shattered remains of an olive tree, her family's tree. Her brother had died at Thermopylae, her father vanished in Salamis, her mother gone in the fires. She was 18, barefoot, her white robe torn and grey with soot. She watched as the soldiers gathered the women of the city, the noble, the widowed, the young, binding them together with ropes, of course, hemp. When one soldier seized her by the wrist, she didn't scream. She looked at him, eyes steady, as if daring him to see her not as spoil but as human. The man hesitated, then shoved her into line with the others. Silence meant survival. The Persians began branding the captives with the seal of the empire, a heated bronze sun pressed against flesh. The hiss of burning skin filled the air like the whisper of snakes. Thea clenched her jaw until blood filled her mouth. To resist was death, but to yield felt worse. The day bled into evening. The Parthenon still stood, though its marble goddess Athena looked down upon the flames as though turned to stone herself. Perhaps, Thea thought, the gods had left them. Or perhaps they watched, helpless, as mortals destroyed what they once loved. Night came, and the invaders lit their campfires among the ruins. The smell of roasted meat and spilled wine mixed with the cries of women. The Persians sang songs of victory, deep, rhythmic, almost mournful, as if celebrating not conquest, but destiny. In their pavilion, Xerxes dined with his generals, listening as they toasted his divine right to rule from the Nile to the Aegean. He smiled faintly, but his eyes were elsewhere, fixed on the burning horizon. Outside, Thea sat against a broken column, wrists bound, the firelight flickering across her face. Beside her, an older woman whispered, "Do not cry. They feed on tears." Thea nodded slowly. She thought of the sea, of the white cliffs of her childhood, and whispered a prayer, not for rescue, but for memory. The Persians believed they had conquered Athens, but Thea swore that as long as one Athenian heart still beat, the city lived. At dawn, Xerxes rode through the ashes on a black horse draped in silk. The captives bowed their heads as he passed, but Thea dared to look up. For a moment, her gaze met his. The god-king's expression did not change. It was the look of a man who had seen so much beauty and ruin that both meant the same, yet something flickered in his eyes. Curiosity. "Take them to Sardis," he ordered. "Let Greece serve Persia, even in silence." And so the women of Hellas, the daughters of a fallen civilization, began their march eastward. Barefoot, bruised and silent, they walked through the ruins of their home. The ground still smoldered under their steps, the marble dust clinging to their skin like ghostly ash. Behind them, the smoke of Athens rose into the dawn, not as surrender, but as a promise. For every city that burned, a story would rise from the ashes. And among those women, one would carry that promise farther than any soldier could imagine. Her name was Thea of Athens. The march from Athens to Sardis was not a journey, it was a slow erasure. Day after day, the Greek captives walked barefoot along the scorched earth of Asia Minor, their ankles bleeding from the iron chains that linked them together. The sun burned their backs, the wind carried the dust of their homeland behind them. Some fell, never to rise again. No one was permitted to stop. The Persian soldiers who guarded them did not speak their language, but their silence was an order clearer than any word: move or die. When they crossed into Lydian soil, the land began to change. The ashes of Greece gave way to green hills, rivers, and roads paved in polished stone. Yet beauty only made the pain sharper. For Thea, every step eastward felt like walking deeper into exile, into a world built on someone else's triumph. At last, after weeks of walking and whispers of rebellion crushed by fear, Sardis rose before them. The Persian capital shimmered like a mirage: white marble palaces, carved gates taller than temple columns, streets lined with gold lamps that burned even under daylight. The scent of myrrh and cedar oil drifted through the air, disguising the stench of sweat and grief that followed the captives. To the conquerors, Sardis was paradise. To Thea, it was gilded captivity. They were herded into the royal courtyard, a sea of faces: Greek, Ionian, Phoenician, all marked by loss. Eunuchs in jeweled turbans walked among them, counting, cataloguing, and sorting them like livestock. A fountain stood at the center, its water reflecting the blue of the sky, a cruel imitation of the Aegean Thea once knew. It was there, beside that fountain, that she saw him again. Xerxes sat on his high throne under a canopy of gold-threaded silk. His face was neither cruel nor kind, only remote, as if carved from the same marble as his palaces. Around him stood his generals and scribes, recording each moment of his triumph. When the guards pushed Thea forward, she fell to her knees, her wrists still bound. A translator stepped close. "The great king wishes to know your name." For a moment, Thea said nothing. The air around her was heavy, expectant. Finally, she lifted her chin and spoke clearly. "Thea of Athens." The words seemed to hang in the air like defiance. The translator repeated them, and Xerxes smiled faintly. "A flower from the ashes," he said in his own tongue. "She will serve the gods of Persia now." That night, Thea was taken to the palace. The walls gleamed with gold mosaics. The air shimmered with incense. Musicians played soft melodies on lutes, and dancers moved like drifting smoke. Yet Thea felt as though she were walking through the halls of the dead. They dressed her in silks, dyed crimson and blue, colors of royalty, not of home. Her hair was braided with pearls. In the polished bronze mirrors, she saw a stranger. From the gardens came laughter, Persian nobles feasting beneath fig trees, their goblets overflowing. Thea stood beside a column and watched them, realizing that the same fire that had destroyed her city now lit their celebrations. Days turned into weeks. Thea learned fragments of the Persian tongue, enough to understand commands and whispers. She heard the eunuchs speak of new rebellions in Ionia, how Greek cities were rising again. But the king's will was absolute. The punishment for defiance was as swift as it was merciless. Within the palace, she saw other captives, women from Sparta, from Chios, from Lesbos, all wearing smiles carved by fear. Some had grown numb. Others hid small acts of defiance in their silence. At night, when all else was quiet, Thea would press her palm against the cold marble wall and whisper her brother's name. A ritual, a remembrance, a refusal to vanish. The court celebrated her as an exotic prize, a symbol of Greece's defeat. The poets sang of her beauty, comparing her eyes to the morning sea. Xerxes himself sometimes watched her during banquets, his expression unreadable. He saw in her what all tyrants crave, the illusion that conquest could make beauty eternal. But inside, Thea's heart burned like the last ember of a dying city. One evening, as the sunset bled over the palace domes, Thea looked down at Sardis from her balcony. The city glowed in gold and red, and for the first time, she understood the true cruelty of empire, not the sword, but the silence that follows it. Below her, laughter echoed, hollow and endless. She turned from the view and whispered to the dark, "If the gods are silent, then I will be their voice." In that moment, something shifted. Thea stopped being a captive. She became a witness, and one day, a weapon. In the heart of Sardis, the palace of Xerxes stretched like a labyrinth. Corridors of marble that gleamed even in the moonlight. Chambers perfumed with incense and guarded by statues of winged lions. Every whisper carried, every step echoed. It was a place built not for comfort, but for awe. A monument to power, meant to remind even the air that it belonged to the king. Thea learned to move through it like a shadow. By now, months had passed since her capture. Her Persian was passable, her silence fluent. She had memorized the rhythms of the palace, when guards changed posts, when the scribes retired, when the torches dimmed. What began as survival became observation. She listened, she remembered, she waited. In the daytime, she served at banquets for the queen mother, Atossa, the formidable matriarch who had ruled beside Darius, and now counseled her son with a voice that carried the weight of 1,000 wars. Thea would stand quietly behind jeweled pillars, pouring wine for nobles who spoke of rebellions and omens, of rivers that refused to be bridged, and cities that would not kneel. One afternoon, Atossa's sharp gaze fell upon her. "You are Greek," the queen said in slow, deliberate words. "Yes, my lady," Thea replied, lowering her head. Atossa studied her, not as a person, but as one might study a strange bird brought from a far shore. "Athens," she murmured, tasting the word like wine, "a proud city. Pride burns brightest before it turns to ash." The courtiers laughed softly. Thea did not. Her pulse pounded in her throat, but her voice remained calm. "Ash feeds the roots of trees, my lady," she said. Atossa's eyes lingered on her a moment longer. Then, surprisingly, she smiled, thin, cold, intrigued, a sharp tongue for one without a country. That night, Thea was sent back to her chamber, but the exchange did not go unnoticed. Servants whispered of the Greek girl who had spoken to the queen and lived. It was there, in those dimly lit quarters beneath the grand halls, that Thea found others like her. Lydians, Egyptians, Ionians, women who had been stolen by war and swallowed by empire. Among them was Myrrhen, the girl who had marched beside her from Athens. Her body had grown thin, her face harder, but her eyes burned with the same quiet fury. "They think we are nothing," Myrrhen whispered, one night, as rain drummed softly against the courtyard tiles. "But gods do not sleep forever." Thea leaned closer. "Then let's wake them." And so, the whispers began. At first, they were nothing more than shared stories of home, of lost families, of how freedom once felt. But slowly, those stories grew teeth. They began to map the palace, the storage chambers, the kitchen tunnels, the old service passages that ran beneath the gardens. A eunuch with a soft heart told them when the guards changed. A Lydian cook smuggled them scraps of parchment. Every piece of information was a seed. Thea kept it all in her mind, weaving a tapestry of exits and timings, waiting for the right moment to pull a single thread and unravel the empire from within. Beyond their walls, the world shifted. Rumors reached Sardis that Greek cities were rising again. Ionia burned with rebellion. Even in Persia's marble halls, the sound of dissent was beginning to echo. Xerxes' fury returned like a storm. He walked the corridors at night, his golden robe trailing behind him, demanding loyalty from men who already trembled in his presence. Thea often glimpsed him from afar, his face lit by torchlight, his voice calm yet deadly. To most, he was divine. To her, he was mortal, and that was his weakness. One evening, as she poured wine in the great hall, she overheard a general speak of omens in the west. The king's jaw tightened. "The gods favor the strong," he said coldly, "and I am the only god that matters." His words echoed through the chamber, the arrogance of a man who believed he could command even fate. But to Thea, it sounded like a curse. That night, thunder rolled across the sky. Rain lashed the courtyards as the captives gathered in the servants' hall, their whispers now a plan. Beneath the kitchens, they spread a crude map drawn from memory and rumor. "There are tunnels under the gardens," Thea said, her voice steady. "Old ones from before the palace was rebuilt. If we reach them, they'll take us to the river." The captives exchanged uncertain looks. Some trembled, others nodded. "We'll go during the feast of Mithra," said Myrrhen. "The guards will be drunk, the nobles distracted." The plan was desperate, but desperation was all they had left. Over the next weeks, they prepared in silence. They memorized turns, gathered small knives, and hid bits of dried fruit. Each night, as the palace celebrated its wealth, the women of Hellas whispered rebellion into the marble. Then, one evening, Thea was summoned again, this time to the Queen Mother's private chambers. Atossa dismissed her attendants and studied Thea in silence. "You have been here many months," she said softly. "You've learned our ways. Tell me, do you still dream of your old gods?" Thea hesitated. "Dreams cannot be commanded," she replied. Atossa turned toward the window where the moon hung pale over Sardis. "Be careful with your dreams, child. In Persia, even dreams can betray you." When Thea returned to her quarters, Myrrhen was waiting. Her face was pale, her hands shaking. "The queen knows something," she whispered. "We must move now." Outside, the festival drums were already beginning to echo through the palace, a rhythm of victory, of blindness. Thea looked at the women gathered in the shadows. "Then tonight," she said quietly, "we stop being shadows." They carried no swords, only courage. Each woman held a token of home, a coin, a ribbon, a lock of hair, a shard of marble from Athens. Thea's was smooth and white, a piece she had hidden since the city burned. She pressed it to her heart. As the first lamps flickered from the terrace, Marine's signal, the captives moved. Through the dim corridors of the palace, they slipped past drunk guards and half-open doors. The scent of wine and cedar smoke filled the air. Outside, fireworks bloomed above Sardis, painting the sky with false stars. In the gardens, Thea paused. For the first time since her capture, she heard the night wind whisper through the cypress trees, a sound like home. "Go," she breathed, and the daughters of Helles vanished into the dark. Thea's bare feet splashed silently through the drenched earth as she led the captives toward the edge of the garden. Behind them, the palace of Sardis pulsed with music, drums, flutes, laughter, the feast of Mithra in full glory. Wine spilled like blood over marble floors. Nobles danced beneath torchlight, unaware that their slaves were slipping into the night like ghosts. Ahead, Miriam's signal flickered again from the terrace. One lamp, then another. The path was clear. Thea knelt and pressed her palm into the damp soil. "To the river," she whispered. The women followed in silence, clutching their small tokens of home. Each step was a prayer, each breath a rebellion. They moved through the tunnel hidden beneath the kitchen storage, an ancient passage once used by servants of Darius, long forgotten by the new court. The air was thick, stale with centuries of dust. Their torches burned low, their hearts louder than their footsteps. Thea counted each turn by memory, left at the pillar, then down. The stone walls sweated with moisture. The tunnel sloped downward. The faint murmur of running water began to echo ahead, the river that could carry them away from this gilded prison. But as the first woman crawled through the final archway, a sound cut through the dark, the crack of armor, the hiss of a torch. They froze. Shouts followed, echoing through the tunnel. Light flared behind them, golden, cruel. The immortals had found them. "Go," Miran cried, shoving Thea forward. "Take them. Run." Thea hesitated, but Miran's eyes burned with command. There was no time. She seized the nearest woman's hand and ran, dragging her through the opening into the night. Cold air struck her face. They were at the riverbank, dark water churning beneath a pale moon. "Into the water," she shouted. The women waded in, the current biting at their legs, their chains clinking softly like the last echoes of captivity. Behind them came the shouts of soldiers, the clash of iron, the beam of torches cutting through fog. An arrow hissed past Thea's ear and vanished into the river. Another struck the mud beside her. She turned once, just long enough to see Merrin standing in the tunnel mouth, defiant, unarmed, a silhouette against the torchlight. A soldier lunged, and she met him with a scream that was both fury and farewell. Then the tunnel collapsed. Thea threw herself into the current. The river swallowed her whole, cold, roaring, endless. For a moment, there was nothing but blackness and the taste of iron in her mouth. Then she surfaced, gasping, her body bruised, her lungs on fire. Around her the others clung to driftwood and branches, their faces pale in the moonlight. By dawn they reached the far bank, hidden among reeds and stones. The palace was a faint glow in the distance, beautiful, eternal, indifferent. No one spoke. The silence was not fear but reverence, as if they all knew that something sacred had happened, something the world would try to forget. The days that followed were cruel. They moved westward through the forests of Lydia, weak from hunger and exhaustion. They scavenged roots, drank from streams, slept beneath pine trees. Rain fell without mercy. Yet even as the world punished them, freedom felt strange, raw, intoxicating. When Moraine's name was spoken, it was not with grief but with pride. "She gave us our dawn," one whispered. Thea walked at the front, guiding them through valleys and hills. Her body trembled from fever, but her will was sharper than ever. "We will reach the sea," she said. "We will see Greece again." 3 days later, they found it. From the cliffs, the Aegean spread before them, vast, glittering, alive. The horizon burned gold beneath the sun. The women fell to their knees, some weeping, some laughing through tears. Thea stood still, her eyes wide. After so long in gilded captivity, the sea felt like a god that had finally answered. But the Persians had not forgotten. Far below, riders appeared, dark figures moving swiftly along the foothills. The soldiers of Xerxes were hunting what they could not understand. An idea set loose. Thea turned to the others. "Run to the water," she ordered. "Don't stop. Whatever happens, the sea will take us home." They scrambled down the rocky slope, cutting their feet on sharp stones, clutching one another as the sound of hooves thundered behind them. The first arrows whistled through the air, striking into sand and rock. Thea snatched up a broken spear that lay half buried by time, the remnant of some forgotten battle. When the first rider reached her, she didn't flinch. She struck as he swung his blade, the spear grazing his shoulder and knocking him from his horse. "Go," she shouted to the others. Now, the captives ran. The sea roared like applause. Thea was the last to reach the cliff's edge. She looked once more toward Sardis, toward the empire that had taken everything, and then she leapt. The fall tore the breath from her lungs. The sea rose to meet her, cold, fierce, merciful. She sank into the depths, weightless, until the current pulled her upward again. When she broke the surface, gasping, the others were waiting in the surf, pulling her toward an abandoned fishing boat. Arrows rained down from the cliffs, but none found their mark. The oars splashed, rhythm steady and desperate. The horizon glowed with the first blush of dawn. Thea turned her face toward the rising sun. Salt stung her eyes, but she didn't look away. For the first time since Athens burned, she felt it, not triumph, but peace. Days passed at sea. The food ran out. The waves battered them, but fear had lost its power. The women spoke softly of home, of the olive trees, the white columns, the laughter of children yet to be born. One evening, as twilight bled across the water, Thea stood at the bow of the small boat, Myrene's coin, the one given to her before the escape, warm in her palm. She closed her eyes and whispered, "For the sea." Then she let it fall into the waves. When the coast of Greece appeared on the horizon, faint and blue, the women wept. They had crossed not just an empire, but history itself. Thea stepped onto the shore at dawn. The land was scarred, but it was hers. She fell to her knees and kissed the earth. Then she arose, turned to the sea, and whispered, "He will know we were never his." Years later, bards would sing of the daughters of Helles, women who escaped the god king's golden prison and crossed the sea with nothing but courage. Some called it myth, others called it truth. But when the wind rose from the east and carried the scent of salt across the Aegean, the people said it was their voices, whispering, reminding, enduring. And somewhere beyond mortal time, Thea of Athens still walks beside the sea, not as a captive, not as a shadow, but as the memory that no empire could destroy.